Well, hello and welcome to the Think Global Mobility Technology webinar. This is Relocate Global working alongside INEO Global Mobility to bring you this insight on technology. I'm Fiona Murchie, the Managing Editor of Relocate Global and Relocate Magazine. And with me today, I have Ashley Daly, Director of Global Compensation Technology Solutions at INEO, and her colleague Michael Gatto, Manager of Global Mobility. So just a brief word about Relocate Global for those of you who perhaps don't know us. We're a multimedia. We've been around for a long time. This is our 15th year. And we provide magazines, online, a website, digital, supporting information, news and features to support international managers, global mobility teams, relocation professionals and expert HR and global mobility specialists supporting individuals and organisations around the world. So we have a multitude of information and supports. We also have the Relocate Awards and webinars, events, videos, etc. to support what you need to connect and grow in your country and region. So as I said, I'm the managing editor here and I founded the company some while ago. So I have a good overview of the different aspects of global mobility and relocation and have been fascinated over the years by the relevance to all international organisations and indeed domestic companies who are recruiting and retaining staff internationally. So I'd like to introduce you now to Ashley Daly, who, as I said before, is the Director of Global Compensation Technology Solutions at INEO. So Ashley, would you like to tell us a bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you everyone for joining us in what we know are very unsettled times. We appreciate your participation, and just as a quick disclaimer, recognizing we're probably all remote at this point, or most of us, please bear with us should we have any technical difficulties. Hopefully not, but just in case. So I have been with INEO for about 7 months, but my entire career has been in the global mobility space. So I began my mobility career in the Big Four accounting and consulting world. Worked for 2 of the Big Four accounting firms at a time when the world was truly going global. So a great education and great visibility to how technology can support mobility programs and mobility professionals. I subsequently went to work in the corporate mobility arena for what ended up being over a decade, and I had various roles, all mobility related, so interfacing directly with our executives, as well as eventually taking on more of a compensation-focused role. And underpinning all of that was technology. So I was involved with multiple technology implementations, which has led me to my current role with INEO. So look forward to talking to you all today. Thank you.
Great. So a lot of practical knowledge there and experience. So that's really good to have you on this webinar. So now over to you, Mike. I understand you're the tax expert.
Yes, thank you very much, Fiona. My name is Mike Gatto, and I've been with INEO Global Mobility for a little over 2 years now. I am the manager of Global Mobility, and I've spent over 30 years in international assignments, specifically concentrating on tax and global compensation. I too spent most of my career and initially in one of the Big Four accounting firms. And I've also was on assignment myself for 2.5 years to Switzerland from the United States. And I've worked with a couple of different relocation management companies, as well as regional tax firms. And at INEO, I work to support the tax logic in our software, as well as client support for the global compensation modules included with our software.
Brilliant, thank you. And there's nothing like having your own experience of being an expat to know the pain points. So thank you very much. Right, so regarding the webinar, there'll be the opportunity to submit questions. So you can click on the red button at the side of your screen and then just type your message in the dialog box in the panel. We're also going to be having polls, so to participate in a poll, it's the same panel on the right-hand side of the screen, and this will display the poll questions, so please do respond. And if there are any technical issues, then do give us a call or an email. So, our agenda for today. So, as you know, this is being delivered by INEO, and so they're going to introduce their service offering, and that'll be Ashley who introduces this. She'll give also an introduction to the global compensation technology, and then there will be a special focus on the INEO NettoNet Calculator and the potential uses of this tool. And this was something that I was keen that we introduce, because we're aware that some people may be very up to speed with technology, and this is to really top up their knowledge, whereas others are starting from very little knowledge and are looking for the complete getting up to speed with all there is to know. So we're going to have a nice concentration on key vocabulary and review that so everybody's up to speed. And then we'll go over to some case studies, which Mike will introduce, as you see here, international assignment offer and a permanent transfer offer. And then it'll be your opportunity to send in your questions, and please send those in during the course of the webinar, and we'll deal with the questions and answers at the end. So let's get everybody into the swing of things. So are you involved? Let's do this survey now if you'd like to participate. Are you involved in the international assignment permanent relocation offer process for your company or your clients? So if you could start to participate, and I'll just throw it over to you, Ashley. Just give us a bit of a feel for how people are using the technology, and indeed how many, because I was really surprised to find that a lot of people are still using Excel spreadsheets. Was that your finding?
Yes, and so I think we'll actually, later in the webinar, we'll even be asking folks to weigh in as to whether they are leveraging some form of technology beyond Excel spreadsheets. So we'll get a glimpse, but yes, I think, you know, we certainly see a mixed bag. And I think sometimes there's not necessarily a correlation in terms of where technology is being used and where it's not. So for very large programs, you know, you will often see corporations having bought into technology just as a means to deal with the volume. But we also see, you know, some larger companies that you would be surprised are not yet invested in technology and not necessarily leveraging the benefits that can be derived from that. You know, if you are using Excel still, you're not alone. We talk to a lot of companies that are. But I think what hopefully this webinar will bring to light, amongst other things, is that, you know, in a perfect world, technology exists not only to help you be compliant, but it exists to help you, you know, free yourselves up to become more strategic where you are involved in a mobility kind of corporate or RMC capacity. So there's a lot of benefits to be derived, and hopefully we can bring some of that to light today.
Right, so this seems to have the results in now. So 76% of you are already involved with technology and 23% not. So that's fairly encouraging, would you say?
Yes, and so just to clarify, this is folks who have been involved in the international assignment and permanent reload process and potentially using technology. So yes, that's great to hear. And hopefully this will not be totally new territory for our audience.
Right, so let's move over now, Ashley, if you'd like to talk us through INEO services and solutions.
Sure, thank you, Fiona. So we'd like to start off today by providing just a bit of background on INEO. For those of you who've not had an opportunity to work with us previously, INEO is unique in the global mobility arena as the only company to offer comprehensive global mobility management software, outsourced mobility financial management services, and specialized mobility tax services. For decades, some of the world's largest corporations and relocation management companies have relied on us to efficiently manage their global mobility programs. And of note, recognizing we have a global audience here today, INEO has recently expanded its global footprint into EMEA, following its inception in North America a couple of decades ago. So recognizing that the focus of our presentation today is global compensation minded, we'd like to home in a bit more specifically now on INEO's Global Compensation Technology Suite. This comprises the end-to-end global compensation process. So from cost estimate generation to balance sheet preparation to payroll and shadow payroll reporting, compensation collection and audit of that data, to the ultimate preparation of global statements of earnings. So note that our system is designed to be as integrated as possible and minimize the need for redundant data entry, although INEO's global comp modules can also be used in an a la carte fashion. So we have some clients who really do use this technology in more of an end-to-end way, and we have some who use it a la carte, and both are viable options. Recognizing time limitations today, we're not actually intending to go into the system and demo live within the system, but we did think it might be of some value just to give a quick snapshot or glimpse of some of our system reports, just to give a flavor. Obviously, needless to say, and we can reiterate this in the Q&A later, but if anyone has an interest in seeing the system in more detail, we'd be happy to set that up for you as a follow-up. So this first sample report is a cost estimate sample report, and reflecting on the survey responses in terms of how many of you are already involved in the international assignment or permanent reload process. Hopefully this concept is familiar to many of you. INEO's cost estimates are quite global in their spread. So we have 90 countries that we cover from a home, a host, and a hypothetical tax perspective. And we have our own internal tax research team that does that research and that keeps that research updated multiple times a year. Note that the system does also calculate state, provincial, and cantonal tax, and we can support fiscal year tax processing. Our reports can be produced in multiple languages, multiple currencies, and we can provide detailed reports, sometimes useful for finance functions, for example, as well as summary reports, which is sometimes what is viewed at more of a headline kind of HR, et cetera level. Note that our system is configured to support different policy types, so long-term, short-term, permanent move, local plus, and in-country scenarios. All of those can be supported through our software. And I should add that what you're seeing here is just a snapshot. We obviously only had so much space to display on a slide, but a full report would reflect total costs, incremental costs, which is what a lot of organizations are more focused on. And as well, we have the option to provide tax detail on additional tabs of this report. So moving along, the next report in our global compensation workflow is the balance sheet report. So this, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, would be a report that could be shared with an individual to provide a snapshot of their total assignment compensation picture. Note that we can report in both home and host currencies, as well as potentially a third column of service provider payments. So in instances where a service provider rather than a home or host payroll department is issuing payments, that can be reflected here as well. Again, we support multiple currencies across those countries that I referenced previously and multiple frequencies. So this sample report is annual, but we can support quarterly, monthly, et cetera, in terms of the presentation. Another note just for awareness is that we do have existing relationships with several of the preeminent third-party data providers, and we can take data through APIs as well as through table uploads. So the system is compatible with that sort of data upload. And we do integrate, so to my previous comments, trying to reduce redundant entry in this process. Where an individual or a corporation is using both cost estimates and balance sheets, there is integration between those two modules to minimize any duplicate entry required. And we do have individual and batch processing capabilities for these reports.
So this is really pretty comprehensive and ideal really for a lot of people who possibly are not where they think they should be in different countries and currencies, that you can share information also with those expatriates and people on assignment.
Absolutely. I think, the international assignment or permanent relo prospect is quite an overwhelming one. And the idea is if we can condense and consolidate the compensation data in as clear a way as possible, that can at least make this piece of the overall equation more digestible.
Great. Thank you.
So the next report you see here is a sample payroll instruction report. And this is effectively the translation of balance sheet data into a format that payroll departments or systems can take in. And similar to the balance sheets, these can be processed at a batch level. So for an entire location or for an entire client, they can be reported on an individual basis. And this too can be both a manual and an integrated process. So we do have the ability to create APIs with payroll departments. So where we map our compensation codes in our system to payroll system codes and bring up that data automatically. We also have clients who utilize this in much more of a manual fashion. And I should note, although this is referenced as a payroll instruction, the shadow payroll instruction works similarly. And for those of you who may not be familiar with that concept, we will review that in just a little bit.
Great.
This final report that we're showing you here in this series is a statement of earnings, or what some of you may refer to as global compensation summaries. But this is effectively the end product of running an entire global compensation process. So many of you will be aware that ultimately tax providers for tax return preparation purposes require a picture of total compensation to do what they need to do. And so the idea is that by leveraging some of the automated compensation import functionality of our system, as well as some of the compensation audit functionality, that the ultimate output would be a report of this type that can provide that picture to a tax provider. Note that these reports as well can be run at an individual or a system and sort of batch level. Multiple currencies can be reported on, and the report format is quite flexible. So items can be grouped by source, by dates. Again, Fiona, recognizing our global audience. So what you see here is probably a more US-centric report for our sample assignee, but we can certainly report on a UK fiscal year basis, other country fiscal years, etc.
Yes, great. Thank you.
All right, so Fiona, I think I'll hand it over to you for our survey question 2.
Yeah, so it looks like some people are already participating. So here's the next survey question. If you are involved in the international assignment process, do you use some form of technology to facilitate the offer process? So, yes, there we go. Well, that's encouraging. Nearly 80%. Oh, people are changing their minds.
People are probably wondering right now whether Excel spreadsheets qualify. So perhaps rethinking themselves. Yeah, and I think what's worth noting here, we have a lot of conversations with clients who want to understand how do we rationalize the technology investment with our organizations. And certainly, especially at times like these, when there are other priorities, it's not a small undertaking, but there is a lot of value to be derived. And I think there's a huge focus on trying to free up mobility and HR and RMC resources to be more strategic and to get out of some of the minutia. We talk to some clients who are running very manual processes that are very labor intensive. So the idea that technology can facilitate a lot of that batch processing, that it can bring a lot of the compliance of these global tax calculations and budgeting and forecasting for costs of assignments. It can really bring mobility into the forefront. And a lot of mobility professionals, I'm sure, will relate to the notion of trying to get out of the minutia and get into the strategic. So a conversation we would be happy to have with anyone interested in doing it. If you're looking to embark on the technology kind of quest and aren't sure how to go about it, certainly a conversation we would be happy to have.
Yes, good. So hope that the 24% of people who are not using the technology will be persuaded to free up their time and energies to concentrate on other things and get some technology involved with their systems. So on to the next item, which is the NettoNet Calculator, Ashley.
Yes, so this is the newest development in the INEO Global Compensation Technology Suite, and this is the focus of our presentation today. Some of you will be familiar with working with a tool like this. It's not necessarily part of all international assignment programs, but it's a really valuable tool and certainly has a number of uses. And so our hope today is to demonstrate some of those uses and bring some visibility to a tool that might support folks, particularly who are involved in the offer stage of international assignment and relocation, permanent relocation offers. So what we're going to take you through in a moment are case studies that illustrate these two key uses. But the first one, the NettoNet Calculator, can be used to facilitate host country shadow tax reporting in temporary international assignment scenarios where an individual is retained on a home-based comp structure. So Mike will elaborate shortly, but in summary, the mere fact of a person, for example, being paid exclusively from a home location does not preclude a requirement to report tax in a host jurisdiction. And the tool can certainly be used to facilitate that host reporting. The other use that we will illustrate today is transfer country salary modeling in international permanent transfer scenarios. So those of you involved in this space will know it's not enough to pluck an individual out of a certain location and offer them a market reference salary in a new location and have it necessarily be a viable competitive offer for that person. So the hope is that in using the NettoNet Calculator, the viability and a more legitimate comparison of that home country situation to a host offer can be gleaned.
Great. So very practical solutions when people are making an offer.
Indeed. So now I'm going to hand over to Fiona just to cue up some key vocabulary. So I think to Fiona's initial comments, we didn't want to take for granted that some of the critical concepts we're going to be discussing today are familiar to everyone. So please humor us, those of you who are familiar with these.
Yeah.
And those of you who aren't, we're just going to give a few kind of summary details about these concepts before we jump into some case studies.
Yeah. Okay. So who's going to take the first one? The home-based international assignment compensation approach. So, Mike, you going to explain what home-based means?
Certainly, Fiona. A home-based international assignment compensation approach, or otherwise known as the balance sheet approach, refers to the retention of an expatriate on a home country-based salary and incentive plan structure with certain offsets and then also allowances applied to preserve the home country purchasing power that would be needed in the host country. This is most widely used with the expatriate compensation model and contrasted with a host-based or headquarter-based, etc. approaches.
Yeah, and just to explain to people what the host country is, just if they're really not familiar with that.
Okay, when someone goes on an international assignment, they can either remain on their home-based compensation plan or a host-based, that is the locality in which they are moving to, and basically paid similarly to a local being hired locally in that particular country.
Great. Okay. Now, shadow tax reporting, that sounds all very mysterious. Are you going to take that one again, Mike, or are we going to throw that over to Ashley?
Oh, either
Mike
one.
will probably cringe if I take a tax question on his behalf. So Mike, take it away.
Okay, so let's hear the shadowiness then. What's it all about?
Shadow tax reporting, which is a term that is conducive with, rather than allowing a periodic or annual reconciliation and payment of tax, many authorities expect tax to be automatically withheld via payroll, and companies risk fines if these requirements are not being met. So the term quote unquote shadow payroll refers to a payroll which runs concurrently with the home payroll for purposes of meeting host country tax compliance requirements. It's not necessarily run for the purpose of physical payment to the individual, but it's more for corporate reporting compliance in the host location, given the compensation that's paid from a home scenario.
Mm-hmm. Great. Now, the next one, I think I might be on a bit of easier footing here. Localization. I know about localization. So that's, in other words, when you move somebody to another country or region and you decide to give them the local terms and conditions. But what does local plus mean? Ashley, over to you on that.
Sure. So yes, most of you will probably be familiar with the concept of localization, but local plus refers to a compensation approach where an individual is placed on a host country's salary and incentive plan structure, but provided with additional allowances that are not typically extended to a local national. So housing allowance, education support, transportation allowance, these are all examples of benefits that might be provided at least on some sort of temporary basis at the point of localization to help incentivize or entice an individual to accept local terms. So we'll get into a case study here in a bit that brings that notion to life and where that might be appropriate.
Great. Okay, thank you. So over to you, Mike. Please introduce the first case study.
All right, thank you, Fiona. Well, in this first case, we are basically considering a temporary international assignment from Belgium to the United States with the intention to keep the individual on a Belgian compensation structure, and that individual can have an option to receive a portion of the net assignment compensation in the host location of the United States. So they're being paid from their home country, Belgium, but they have the option to receive a portion of their pay in the host location, which is the US. And the intent is to shadow in the host location, the United States, that payroll being paid from Belgium, as in the United States, it's required to report all compensation information given the home compensation that's being paid or generated. It needs to be reported in the United States in its entirety. Okay, certain assumptions that are being applied to this particular case. We have a married employee from Belgium with one child who is expected to be on assignment in the United States for 3 years. And as tax residency will be broken in Belgium, the company is looking to provide a net pay equivalent to what that person would have received had they stayed at home. And the individual is also to receive a couple of allowances or entitlements as incentives to participate in the assignment. And they have the opportunity as well, as I mentioned in the previous slide, to split their pay between the home and host locations. Just note in the last bullet point that the individual is remaining on the home country social security plan, and due to the totalization agreement between Belgium and the United States, they or the company do not have to pay social security taxes in the United States. Okay, so we ran this particular scenario through our NettoNet Calculator. And as you see, well, this is the report that is generated from the system. And basically, we call this our U-shaped methodology. One starts on the upper left where the blue arrow is pointing down. And we begin with the annual gross salary in the home location, which in this case is 100,000 euros per year. And we travel down the arrow to determine the net pay in Belgium in a typical scenario, and we're left with approximately 59,000 euros as a net pay in Belgium had the person remained in Belgium paying Belgian taxes. We then travel across the bottom of the U, which is basically the middle of the report, and we add a couple of allowances to the net pay, as the company will pay the tax on these allowances, but we arrive then at a net pay in the host country, the United States, in US dollars. So we take the net pay typically experienced by this individual in their home location, Belgium, and in euros. We add allowances that the company will entitle them in the policy to arrive at a net pay in the United States. That's the about $104,500. We then travel up the blue arrow in the United States, starting with the net pay to quote unquote gross up to the gross pay in the host location or the United States, taking into consideration the taxes that need to be paid, in this case by the company in the United States, as all compensation needs to be reported there. So allowances are able to be incorporated if the policy allows. Okay. Also, in this particular calculator, the net-to-net calculator, exchange rate options can be accommodated. And also at the bottom of this particular report, we have what we call our salary delivery presentation. Okay, and this salary delivery presentation can accommodate multiple frequencies of pay where appropriate. Therefore, the net-to-net is the upper part of the calculation, and the payment options and frequencies are highlighted in the bottom portion of the report.
And just to build upon Mike's comments, so this is quite a flexible report. So in this circumstance, obviously, we're talking about a home-based comp approach. We're discussing a need to report that home net compensation in the host location and gross up for host country tax, which is a company obligation under an equalization principle. But in this circumstance, the individual is given the option to take their net pay on some sort of a split basis, which is what you see in the lower portion. Keep in mind, you will have policies and clients and circumstances where a person will be paid exclusively at home and not be given the option to split their pay delivery. And that can certainly be accommodated. Obviously, you wouldn't see the presentation down below in the way that you do if you were operating that sort of a principle. But just to keep in mind, this is quite flexible and just one iteration of what the report can display.
Yep. Thank you very much, Ashley. And what we wanted to portray in this particular case is to show how the net pay typically experienced by an individual in their home location can be brought over to the host location and grossed up for tax purposes, so that for shadow payroll reporting, the company, the employer, can run the gross amount through payroll and achieve the net pay for the individual to be reported in the host location. So I'll move on to the next survey question, and I'll have Fiona take over the third survey question, if that's okay, Fiona.
Yeah, sure. So this is the question, so please participate, everyone. Do you believe your clients, have adequate processes in place to address host country shadow reporting requirements?
Yes, and we laughed a little bit in pulling this question together. Our intent is not to put anyone on the spot or identify anyone directly. If you don't have these processes in place, or your clients don't, or you're not sure, you're certainly not alone. In our experience, some of the larger organizations obviously have more robust processes in place, but particularly companies we talk to that are newer to the global arena are not necessarily aware of what they need to be doing. And so it's always a work in progress as far as we are concerned, and even the companies that operate more robust processes are continually looking to improve them. Consider this an area for perpetual improvement. If any of you aren't sure or are concerned you may not have appropriate processes in place, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to have a conversation with you to help you understand what your exposure might be. Obviously, the intent here is to ensure that you, as an organization, and potentially your expatriates are not put in the position of being audited and found to be out of compliance.
And it is really quite common that some very large companies may only have a small number of expatriates and people on assignment. So it's really nothing to worry about, but it's good to know that technology can solve your problem and deal with, even if you've only got under 20 expatriates, that frees up a lot of time and energy.
True. So do we have any responses? Anyone who was brave enough to answer this?
Yes, well, we've got 32% yes and no 68%. So that's obviously resonating with quite a lot of people there. So do feel free to send in questions if you want to particularly ask about host country shadow reporting. Yes. So shall we move on?
Indeed. Over to you again, Mike.
I will explain the second case study, which as opposed to the first case study, which involved a temporary international assignment, this particular study involves a permanent relocation offer. Okay, and in this case, we have someone who's moving from Canada to Sweden, or the company would like for this person to move from Canada to Sweden. And the goal is to estimate the home country net compensation and establish a host country gross pay to protect that home country net from a tax viewpoint. What is paid at home confirms the estimated purchasing power of the individual, but not only are you trying to understand the home country purchasing power, but then the employer can compare to the local market reference for that particular job. And in this case, the assumptions are that we're starting with a single employee who has a gross home base salary of 150,000 Canadian dollars. It's expected that this individual will relocate to Sweden on the host-based compensation structure, and the individual will move to the Swedish social security system, since they will break ties with the Canadian employer, including terminating from the Canadian social security system. And we will also assume that with research we've provided, the market salary for this position in the host location is about 900,000 Swedish krona per year gross. Okay. And this is the report that's generated from the NettoNet Calculator in our system. And once again, we have this U methodology. And the results on this report indicate that the 150,000 Canadian dollars of gross in the home location comes down to a bit over 101,000 Canadian dollars of a net pay per year. That net then is brought across to the host location of Sweden, which is approximately 656,000 Swedish krona per year net. And then the company would therefore need to gross that up and pay a little over 1.2 million Swedish krona per year gross in Sweden. So this report is indicative for basically severing ties with the home country entity and starting with the person on a payroll and a compensation package from the host location entity. The person's also, remember, leaving their home country social security scheme and moving to the host country social security scheme that is in Sweden. And we have also included on the right the market reference for this position to compare the calculated amounts from the system to just compare with what is typically paid to someone in this position locally in Sweden. And so we need to potentially figure out what the cost of living differences may be. So one could review the U methodology and look at the tax differences. And it's worth noting what's the cost of living differences involved in this particular case. All right. The tax, as calculated on the report, is just one aspect of determining the viability of the move and the economic impact to this particular transferee. Yet the net result from the calculation in this case is that it would be a slightly higher compensation given what was paid in the home country to this individual, slightly higher than the market conditions for a local person being hired in this position.
Yeah, and so here is where we reflect back on this notion of a local plus. So as Mike just illustrated, if the purchasing power of an individual is not going to be preserved in comparing to a local market offer for a role, a couple of approaches can be taken. You know, some companies will ponder, well, maybe we need to go higher than market reference, and that can bring a lot of challenges in itself because you put an individual in a unique or exceptional position relative to other locals, which brings a lot of challenges in itself, not to mention some issues of equity as compared to local peers. So this is where we would potentially see application of a local plus package as being appropriate. Where, yes, the market reference salary at host doesn't necessarily preserve the home net, obviously exclusive of any cost of living differences that might be at play, but at least from a tax perspective, this is where you might say, assuming equal cost of living relationship, that's not a huge factor, we're going to continue housing stipend for a period of time, maybe 2 years, and we're going to phase it out, provide 100% allowance for the first year and provide 50% for the second year and then phase out. We've seen a lot of companies consider education support in this circumstance. So on the assumption that a child who's been relocated internationally will need some form of private schooling, you might see provision of education support on some sort of phased out basis. So just trying to illustrate here practical application of local plus and where it might be appropriate and brought to light by nature of having run that net-to-net calculation.
And there is a poll question on that, but let's move on. So here we are, your chance to reflect on what you've heard about Local Plus. So let's see what people think. Do you or your clients operate any sort of Local Plus policies to address potential gaps in international permanent transfer scenario? Right, so there's rapid tension here. I don't know if you can see that now, but we've got yes, 66% and no. Oh, it's just varying again as people sort themselves out. So at the moment, 61% yes and 38% no. So does that surprise you, Ashley, do you think?
No, it doesn't. I think another critical data point around this question, which obviously this question isn't asking, is what are the geographies at play? So yes. In my experience, you have country combinations where a local offer is generally quite attractive. So moving from certain geographies to other geographies, were you to run that net-to-net comparison that we just demonstrated, the answer would be very much in the individual's favor, and Local Plus isn't really a critical concept for consideration. You have other geographies where you're put in much more of a position of having to incentivize and justify a local offer. So I think that's a critical data point that might play into responses. What are the geographies that you as mobility professionals are dealing in? The other component to this, I think a critical demographic, is what is the status of the individuals that are being relocated. So are these folks who want to relocate? Are these individuals who need to be relocated for corporate strategic purposes, and they do need to be incentivized quite heavily to potentially accept a move? So obviously, critical context, we tried to keep the question simple, but it is quite interesting to see that a lot of our audience is operating these policies already.
Great. Okay, well, that was really useful. So now let's go over to some questions, and we've had a few coming in. So if you're listening and you want to send in some more questions, we'd be happy to receive them. So here is a very interesting one and very current at the moment. We've acknowledged that there's a lot of disruption caused by the coronavirus situation. So here's a question about that. What impact could coronavirus have on the global workforce's tax situation, especially if someone is in lockdown in another country and at risk of falling foul of tax residency's rules? How could the INEO system support companies and individuals in this situation? So I think this is something you're going to come up with a lot.
Yes, Fiona, this is Mike, and I can entertain that question because actually it has come across our desks recently. And just to let you know, the INEO suite of global compensation modules does have embedded into it the taxability of different compensation items in over 90 different countries, as well as the tax residency rules and regulations specific to each country. And in these days of coronavirus, what has been brought across our desks has been the question of, okay, what if someone is forced to remain at home and crosses a line, let's say, between what's considered short-term versus long-term residency? Excuse me. Well, our system can handle what those tax impacts could have if that particular country decides to be extremely compliant and strict with regards to maintaining the rules and regulations concerning short-term versus long-term impacts on temporary assignees in that particular location. Now, what we're investigating, because each country is different, what the particular country will do in light of the coronavirus situation as far as assignees being forced into a particular scenario that was not the original intention of the assignment. And these things are developing basically on a daily basis around the globe, and we will keep our software up to date as far as excuse me, how each country will treat a particular assignment. But just to let you know, our software does include the impact of short-term versus long-term assignments or residency, and how that may be how the tax residency could be possibly maintained or broken depending on the facts and circumstances of the individual assignee.
Great, thanks. Now, there has been a short question here, someone posing about, does the system accept INR currency for India? Are you able to quickly answer that one?
Yes, it does include INR for India.
Great, thank you. Now, here's one about agility. Given the agility needed for managing global teams in today's operating environment, is this the digital tipping point, do you think? And the insights from the NettoNet Calculator and other features, Is this an opportunity perhaps for global mobility teams to take their place at the top table and offer strategic insight to the C-suite? Right. Over to you, Ashley.
Yes, happy to at least give you my 2 cents. I think yes, and I'll certainly speak from experience in saying that mobility sometimes doesn't have a logical home. So in my corporate mobility experience, for example, we wavered every few years from belonging to compensation and benefits to belonging to recruitment. There was always some question, where does mobility fit or sit within an organization? And so I think part of that is a lack of understanding of precisely what mobility professionals do, a lack of understanding of the complexity and the value that it brings to an organization. So absolutely, from our perspective, any opportunities to help mobility professionals become part of those critical discussions, spend less of their time in the weeds, in the minutia, leveraging batch processes, leveraging automation, all of those opportunities, in my view and in my own personal experience, really bring mobility individuals to an elevated position from a sort of corporate and strategic perspective. So yes, I walk the walk in terms of my belief in the value of technology and what I've seen it do for mobility functions.
Great, thank you. So one more, I think this will probably have to be our final one. What does it mean to have tools like the NettoNet Calculator for global mobility and HR teams? How do you see their lives being made easier day to day? So that's how is that going to free up time, I suppose, for global mobility and HR teams and for expatriates too? And what are the benefits?
Yes, so I guess if we consider the second case study that Mike took us through, it's a really good example where, if organizations aren't armed with the tools to put context around offers, potentially they're in a position of extending offers that don't provide a lot of value or incentive to individuals to accept. So to me, again, this is part and parcel of my previous comments, but I think that technology can add a layer of sophistication to some of those conversations, to some of those transactions, and really arm individuals, whether they are RMC, global comp teams, whether they are corporate mobility professionals, corporate recruitment individuals who are involved in the offer process, arming them with information that's going to prepare them to have good conversations with candidates. And put them on a front foot as opposed to in a reactive position, and sort of left unclear or in, a position of not being able to respond to some challenges that come to them.
Yeah, and psychologically, I imagine for expatriates, it's good to see the facts and figures there in front of them. Did you find that?
Absolutely. I'm sure Mike can vouch for this as well. But you have expats who span spectrums of wanting nothing to do with the details and trusting that their organizations are doing right by them, to individuals who want to understand every figure and every eventuality. I think, again, technology provides that flexibility. Again, in some of our summary reports versus detail reports, I think a lot of mobility is about speaking to your audience in the way that they understand and want to be spoken to. And I think having flexible technology that gives you those options is really critical.
And this is also quite a good tool for supporting employee engagement, I'd have thought, and the employee experience.
Absolutely. I think, survey after survey has shown that to the extent that individuals feel bought into the experience, it obviously enhances the chances of assignment success. Particularly right now in this very challenging environment, I think it's probably all the more critical.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. So really just to wrap up there, and so if you want to put any more questions to Ashley and Mike, when we send out the webinar details at the end, and you can access the slide, we'll give you an opportunity for you to provide questions to put to them and get them responded to. So just to finalise things now, just to remind you that Relocate Global has got a lot of resources on our website. We'll be continuing the series of webinars covering all sorts of global mobility issues, including technology. We are introducing virtual events, and of course there are the Relocate Awards, which again we'll be announcing our winners in May time, with the shortlist currently being prepared and out in April. Podcasts too are something we want to embrace, so let us know what sort of topics you'd like us to cover on podcasts, and videos. You can send us videos and we'll be sharing videos from around the world with our audience online and digitally. You can sign up for our Global Mobility Toolkit, which includes lots of fact sheets on things ranging from policy and practice, diversity, talent management, employee support, health and well-being, and an increasing number of topics. We'd be delighted if anyone has any ideas of what they'd like to contribute, and of course welcome Ennio to provide some information on the technology side. Please contact us and stay informed via the daily news and features. And of course, we have our Relocate Extra, which is an e-newsletter, and we'll be responding to the particularly challenging times with particular newsletters from different regions of the world, and covering employee support, talent and global mobility, as well as leadership issues. Thank you very much to Ennio for providing this webinar and supporting us. If we will, as I said before, the slides will be available. I think that will be tomorrow, and then you can listen back on the web link. So please do get in touch, and if you would require any further information from Ennio and questions answered by Ashley and Mike, they would be pleased to hear from you. So finally, thank you very much for all joining us. We're here to facilitate better connection with global leaders, stakeholders, thought leaders, decision makers and expatriates, and the employees and families that you're supporting. So let us know what is of most use to you, and we will respond and to support your communities. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much to Ashley and Mike for joining us, and goodbye and thank you.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you very much.